The war drums of the trade war are beating, and the shifting balance of power between China and the US is accelerating the restructuring of the world map. From the gravitational shift of the East rising and the West declining, to the reversal of offensive and defensive positions in the technological long march. From industrial chain restructuring, currency shadow wars to the contest for civilizational discourse power. The great transformation unseen in a century has become a tangible pulse of the era felt at our fingertips. What can the younger generation learn from this trade war course initiated by Trump? Standing at this turning point of the era, as witnesses and participants of history, what can the younger generation do? Guancha.cn's live studio launches a youth edition, inviting Mao Keji, PhD candidate at Tsinghua University School of Social Sciences, senior media person and international issues commentator Sheng, and Guancha.cn editor Shi Yang, to share their views on the Sino-US trade war and the changes in the younger generation's perception of China and the US. When a contest of strength is needed, winners and losers will naturally be decided. Shi Yang. I've also heard many teachers say before that they are sometimes surprised by scholars and think tanks from so-called top U.S. institutions who lack a basic understanding of the fundamental national conditions of China and the U.S., even to an outrageous extent, only able to say, the U.S. wins, and China is no good. Even a user's guide to restructuring the global trading system and Trump's entire tariff war are based on such a severe inversion of facts. I'm actually quite curious, has there been any progress or improvement in the U.S. academic community's understanding of China's basic situation, the overall state of Sino-US relations, and changes in the world? Mao Keji. I've actually been in contact with quite a few people from the academic community here. My overall feeling is that when everyone encounters a very powerful opponent, their first thought is a kind of self-protective mentality. Unless they are completely defeated or the opponent gains an overwhelming advantage, they will first find a reason for themselves. For example, I haven't actually failed yet, did the other side cheat? Or, the other side won by unfair means, or, was it just the other side's luck, right? Initially, when I heard this kind of view, I would feel a slight emotional stir. Because I think our China is already quite good, and you still say we are evil, say we violated rules. I wanted to debate them. Later I thought, what's the point of debating? What if you win? Since you think that way, then just continue thinking that way. Anyway, when the time comes that a contest of strength is needed, winners and losers will naturally be decided. If Americans cannot view this gap objectively, that's your loss, not my loss. When you are making a mistake, why should I remind you? Shi Yang. Teacher Mao's change in state is a bit like transitioning from first entering the internet and always wanting to debate people. What you said is wrong. It should be like this, to a state of, yes, okay, everything you say is right. Does this mean that many of the American academic elites you've been in contact with are still like what many teachers previously complained about, without any particular improvement? Mao Keji. Objectively speaking, this depends on the specific situation. After all, Harvard University is a very large school, with all kinds of people. But I can mention a few principles. First, the closer people are to the market, the more objective their understanding of China is. Some of the best research I've heard about China is in business schools or engineering schools. Because if you want to do business with China, and you communicate or act in the wrong way, you lose your own money. No one goes against their own wallet. Second, I think young people are much better than older people. Probably their motivation to maintain an ideological halo is not that strong. They haven't experienced the Cold War, and their desire to defeat another socialist country is not that strong. Third, those on the margins, not professionally trained in the field, might have slightly fewer preconceptions. I've met many very famous people, some even frequently attend high-level occasions domestically in China, but when they teach students in the US, it's a different story. Often, you feel there are quite a few people who say one thing to one person and another to someone else. Of course, I feel these actually don't matter. Because whether you do well or not has its own objective standards. So my mindset is particularly good. I'll listen to whatever you say. I can tell you whatever you want to hear. I can even add some extra flavor for you. Sheng. I studied abroad in the UK before. The environment is similar, but the temporal context is quite different. It was around 2011-2016, when China's GDP had just surpassed Japan to become second. For them, China was in a stage where it had just been noticed. At that time, the West discussed more about how long China's rise could last, whether the China model was a normalized phenomenon or an accidental one. Would it suddenly collapse at a certain node? So at that time, including Western media like The Economist, and Western elites or those who didn't understand China, questioned China more from this angle. Now 10 years have passed, China's size is getting closer to the US's. Over the past few years, whether communicating with foreign media peers or scholars, they have basically concluded that China and the US are like Ronaldo and Messi. Now the West's judgment and perception of China have shifted to another focus. What will the world become after China becomes powerful? Or, if US hegemony is destined to decline, and China is destined to replace the US as the largest economy, what kind of world would that be? They are accustomed to the set of things led by the US West. China is different from the US West, whether it's collectivism, family values, including differences in religious beliefs, it's all too different. So they have fallen into a deep fear. This is not a fear stemming from conflicts of national interest, but a fear stemming from lifestyle. Because after the US became powerful, it changed the lifestyle of people all over the world. They naturally also believe that after China becomes powerful, it will change the lifestyle of people all over the world. In order not to change, they can only deal with China. Although they know China also has the right to develop, there's no other way, they just have a zero-sum mindset. So such views dominate some of the current discussions. The perception of China may have shifted from questioning whether China's development is real and sustainable, to whether China's development is essentially a good thing or a bad thing. When doing external publicity work or external exchanges, I find our work has shifted from demonstrating to them how successful and solid China's development is, to, we have developed, what will happen to you? What the US can bring you, can we bring you? What the US cannot bring you, can we bring you? Or they will ask, you say it's so good, it sounds wonderful too, then what benefits do you get? The US is for hegemony, and shared some development dividends with the world, incidentally globalizing us. What is China for? Because they don't really understand our worldview of, when you attain success, also help others to attain success and cultivate oneself, regulate the family, govern the state, bring peace to the world, they generate many misunderstandings. Welcome to the post-reason era. Shi Yang. In the first decade or so of the new century, people looked at China with the feeling of looking at a young scholar in school. Oh, this student is pretty good, meets teaching standards, meets paper standards. But in the last couple of years, people have started to feel like this student isn't satisfied with being department head, but wants to be dean. At the same time, the old dean is corrupt, has lifestyle problems, is old and acts erratically. If he becomes the new dean, a new broom sweeps clean, how will he deal with his old scholars? So people have started to worry about this. At this stage, the evaluation of your capabilities is no longer objective. They now start from so-called departmentalism, believing that everything China does is for its own interests. So now, often when the West suppresses or contains China, they no longer dwell on whether it is morally justified or noble. What they think is, I want to survive, I want to live my own life, how can I let you become that dean? This is what we see domestically. Teacher Mao, you are currently in the US. What is everyone's attitude towards containing China? Mao Keji. Because China's rise has reached a state where the US cannot stop it, the West believes that after China rises, their standard of living will definitely decline, their global expansion will definitely stop, their global interests will definitely be affected, their financial ability to harvest others will be gone, technological dominance won't exist, talent harvesting won't work, military superiority will be gone. Once it reaches this point, reasons become completely unimportant. I think Trump has already entered this state now. When the US imposed additional tariffs on China, initially they used fentanyl as a reason, later they said you retaliating is the reason. If we really cooperated with Trump to crack down on fentanyl, would he not target us? If we yielded to him, would he not target us? Now we have entered the post-excuse period, the post-reason period. Reasons and excuses are things of the last era. Now it's purely about competing in hard power. On one hand, it's comparing hard power, on the other hand, it's comparing shamelessness, seeing who has no bottom line. Sheng. I found that studying international relations to a certain extent, it's more convenient to just compete in strength. Debating scriptures is too much effort. We are all realists, let's just compete in strength, it's simpler. Shi Yang. This is what Mearsheimer called the tragedy of great power politics. Mao Keji. Actually, the US doing this is not particularly smart. Sometimes finding some excuses and reasons on issues related to morality is not actually to convince oneself, but to convince third parties, to put on a show for other countries globally. If you do many things blatantly, other countries will think the US does things completely without reason. This will increase the hidden costs of many things it does in the future. Many people would rather not engage with the US, or resist to the end, than choose to compromise with the US. This is why during war, you cannot mistreat prisoners or kill those who surrender. Shi Yang. Right, a cornered beast will fight desperately. If they feel they have no future, they will fight to the end. Mao Keji. For those captured and those destined to fail, it doesn't matter. My life is in your hands anyway. But for those still fighting, or those who might join the battle, they will think about this problem. If surrendering offers a way out, then I surrender. But if surrendering is useless, then I can only resist resolutely. So the potential cost of Trump's approach is very high. Another feeling I have is quite profound. It's like what Peng Dehuai scolded Li did back then, selling off your father's land without pang of conscience. The century-old foundation of the United States, although it has its shameless side, objectively speaking, has provided a significant portion of public goods and also offered some conveniences for the operation of the international order. Especially for those allies and countries living relatively well under the current international system, the US is still a provider of public goods. If you respect these customary conventions, talk some sense, although it has constraints and costs for yourself, it actually reduces the operational pressure and resistance of the entire system. In the end, you are still the beneficiary. The fact that this system has been maintained for so many years shows its benefits outweigh its costs. If Trump suppresses China without any reasoning at all, it's equivalent to scrapping the entire system. At the level of US alliances or its small circles, Trump's, by any means necessary, is not a good thing. At least, as a Chinese person, I am happy to see it happen. China's rise has overturned Western perceptions. Shi Yang. During Trump's first term, he started the tech war, trade war, tariff war with China. In this process, I feel not only as media people, but ordinary people have also been forced to learn, to understand what chips, lithography machines, export controls, industrial chains, etc. are. After these battles, what changes do you both think have occurred in the Chinese public's, especially the younger generation's, perception of China and the US? Sheng. From the perspective of Chinese youth, because those who like to watch our shows, or often communicate with us, already have a relatively high understanding of international relations, I feel everyone recently is more concerned about topics related to this latest round of tariff wars or Sino-US strategic competition. For example, many international student friends are concerned about whether their major will be affected, what their future employment will be like. Friends who haven't gone abroad yet, or their parents, are concerned. Is it still necessary to go? After going, will what they learn still be useful when they return? They have question marks about whether the US is advanced and what there is left to learn. Some are those already working, or friends building their own careers. They are concerned. Will my industry be affected? If Sino-US conflict spills over to their company, will the US use long-arm jurisdiction to interfere with his business in China? Even some aren't US companies, but other foreign companies, also worry about whether the trade war spillover affects them. Then there are friends in specific trade-related industries, it's even more directly related. Everyone is concerned about these issues. So we find that Chinese youth, regardless of age group, those preparing to study, those currently studying, and those who have finished studying and are working, are concerned about issues directly related to their own destinies. Why is the base so large? Because China is highly integrated with the world. China is deeply embracing globalization. Even now with difficulties and obstacles, we are still thinking about how to embrace it better, rather than cutting off, directly creating a binary opposition with the outside world. Or like the US, feeling, you all owe me, I want manufacturing reshoring, I'm not playing with you anymore. Logically, as the world's factory, the country with the most complete manufacturing categories, we are more qualified to play this game than you, but we don't choose to. As for American youth, from my understanding, I interact more with American youth in China. Since they choose to come to China, it means they are the type who choose to embrace the world. Among American youth in the US, those with higher cognitive level, who want to do business, definitely cannot leave China and will be more realistic. But the majority in the US are not like that. The proportion of such people in the absolute American population is very small. Especially with the polarization of wealth disparity in the US domestic economy, the opposition between the establishment and the grassroots, if you count heads, count numbers, these rational people can't compete with that bunch of irrational ones. These people, after the great Sino-US reckoning, find China is better, which makes them even angrier. I can't go to your place, I was born in the US, what can I do, right? In this situation, their perception becomes more complex or harder to change. I think no matter how our perception of the US changes, it's still moving in a rational direction. Judging from the overall appearance and portrait displayed by the youth of both sides, we are clearly the more advantageous side, and ultimately likely to prevail in this strategic competition. Mao Keji. I think one point is particularly noteworthy. China's rise has overturned many things that the West, especially after the Cold War, propagated for 10 or 20 years, things we previously took for granted. For example, we used to think that a high proportion of the service industry meant high-end, that Silicon Valley companies were high-tech companies, that these clumsy and crude heavy industries you do are backward. But in recent years I've found that the US, Europe, including many developing countries, everyone values manufacturing more than before, putting manufacturing back at the core of economic development, whether it's very high-end chip manufacturing, aerospace manufacturing, or so-called lower-end like steel, machinery, etc. One shock China's rise brings to everyone is that we use facts to prove that the set of things you originally said is problematic. Whoever believes it dies, you believed it the most, so you suffer the most, we didn't believe it at all, so we are doing quite well. I think this is a crucial realization. Previously we always thought the rising proportion of the service industry represented economic high-end transformation. Clearly this is a very American understanding. Why don't we go earn that high-end money? Not because we don't want to, but because we can't. We don't have the dollar's harvesting ability, nor that many high-value added things, so we can only laboriously do manufacturing. If we had that capability, maybe we wouldn't need to earn this hard-earned money. But now it seems, our suffering instead turned out right. Because the US had this ability to earn money lying down, it wouldn't do the hard work, and now it has degenerated. So now it's time for us to consider how to tell our story. Do we have a set of Chinese solutions, or our own set of methods, not passively proving our stuff works, but actively telling everyone, this is how it should be done, it's the right way? This actually places high demands on us theoretical workers. At least now we can only empirically indicate that we know it might be right, but we don't have a very powerful theory for it. This is a deep feeling I've had recently. If we use this set of things to measure the US, we find it basically has no hope. If the US wants a comprehensive manufacturing revival, it's a very painful problem. Because first, the dollar's hegemonic status will keep its value very high. Unless it voluntarily abandons dollar hegemony, abandons US global influence, can it bring the dollar's price down. But if the dollar's price drops, your global influence declines. Can you still do these things? Can you still enjoy so much talent dividend, capital dividend? Enjoy so many global resources? Not necessarily. If we follow the logic of Trump or MAGA, you'll find they talk themselves into a corner, because they are stuck between two stools. Wanting to boost manufacturing requires abandoning dollar hegemony. But after abandoning dollar hegemony, they might not even have the foundation for manufacturing. So after our rounds of public education campaigns, we find our path was indeed correct. Whether it was the result of active choice or passive acceptance, it doesn't matter, it's just correct. Western triumphalism and Chinese inevitable victory are both inferior to seeking truth from facts. Shi Yang, teacher Mao, brought up a great topic. In a nutshell, it's disenchantment. Our generation feels this particularly strongly. When we were in school, we still deeply believed in the US-led globalization framework. Although we weren't as stubborn as the man who marked his moving boat to locate his lost sword, not to the extent of throwing away white rice to only eat hamburgers and steak, we did use the Western political and economic structure system to measure whether what we were doing was right. In our military enthusiast circles, there's a faction known as the validation seekers. When our PLA develops a weapon, the first thing they do is check if the West has a similar design. If it does, your development path is correct. If it's different from theirs, it must be that our technology isn't good enough. If your thing is completely different from theirs, the leadership will have opinions. Previously, this was a very common logic. But recently, because of the tariff war, trade war, everyone has learned more, including many of my own and my friends' perceptions have been overturned. Disenchantment is happening. Everyone is starting to re-examine this Western system. On the other hand, because it's a trade war, tariff war, there will inevitably be so-called winners and losers. Between this winning and losing, it has split into two factions: the Western triumphalism and the Chinese inevitable victory ideologies. Both of you are very rational research-oriented scholars, and at the same time, you are both immersed in this public opinion. How do you both view these two factions? Sheng, Chinese inevitable victory, and American inevitable victory share a similar characteristic. When anything is stated absolutely, it's prone to problems. Chinese inevitable victory is still different from revolutionary optimism. If we were to define Chinese inevitable victory, it would be equivalent to the theory of quick victory, thinking we are already very good, no need to learn anything else, even looking at returnees from overseas with prejudice. Recently, some entrepreneurs have also been influenced by this thinking and made some statements. This equates to us not needing to be open anymore, we can just close our doors and play by ourselves. This kind of view definitely has a market, especially in a wartime state. We also need it to boost morale. We all know that when mobilizing public opinion, the more absolute, the more sharp the statement, the more appealing it is. It's the same everywhere. But our decision-making level and mainstream social consciousness are rational. This is our difference from the US, and our advantage. Our party's operational logic and historical logic know that kind of play doesn't work. And we firmly adhere to high-quality opening up, and have a clear understanding of our development stage. From policy formulation to understanding the external world, this rational logic serves as a stabilizing anchor. I am reassured about this. As for young people, even when we become powerful, we must keep our eyes open to the world. I find most friends, when understanding things, can distinguish between confidence and complacency. As for the so-called sliding into nationalism, I think the danger for the US is much greater than for China. Because the US decision-making level is utilizing this sentiment. And the US is in the position of the status quo power, US hegemony is declining, naturally its anxiety and sense of crisis will be stronger. It will hurry to protect itself while it still has advantages, but it is also highly self-regarding, making the obstacle to learning from others and acknowledging others' achievements greater. So the US situation is the reverse of ours. As I said answering the previous question, the overall portrait of our youth is more competitive and more rational than theirs. Of course, there will always be extreme conservatives, win-school adherents, quick victory adherents, but overall they won't have a major impact. Mao Keji. I think this is a particularly good question. I have great confidence in our Chinese youth, and in the broadest masses of the Chinese people. Extreme thoughts among a minority will definitely exist, but don't underestimate that we are a socialist country led by the Communist Party of China. On the Tiananmen rostrum, one side reads, "Long live the People's Republic of China," the other side reads, "Long live the great unity of the world's people." At least in our mainstream values, there is a genetic resistance to this kind of national chauvinism, to this kind of religious extremism. If there is a fair, open contest between China and the US, we are not afraid of them at all. If the competition is about who is more open, who can better unite the global South, unite countries including US allies, whoever can do that will achieve final victory. Then, in terms of unity, we have an advantage over Trump. Moreover, our development momentum, industrial base, national spirit, I think are all very suitable for participating in this global competition, and ultimately able to win. When we look at this issue, we should still use the method of seeking truth from facts, objectively estimating our probability of winning. Actually, once you compare, you find we simply don't need to resort to some very extreme ideologies. I think what Teacher Yang said just now is very good. The danger for the US is much greater than ours. Because they need to resort to some very extreme, very stupid things to possibly obtain the same probability of winning. We can win by resorting to progressive, open, intelligent things, so why use the worst tricks? I have always been optimistic, but I don't think I am part of China must win. If we have areas where we are not doing well, we can also learn from them. But if you tell MAGA to learn from China, they would go crazy hearing it. Why should I learn from China? This is our difference from them. I think the US has always been a good teacher for us. Even if one day we truly face each other with drawn bows on the battlefield, they can still be our teachers. Every country in the world has something we can learn from. Why should we appear with an overbearing image? Actually, we have been doing very well all along. Including the recent softening of Trump's tariff policy, it was also because US bond yields rose. Everyone suspected that the Chinese were selling, but in the end, it wasn't the Chinese selling. What does this illustrate? We have great power credibility. We still have reservations when doing many things. US debt is not our burden, but our asset. Sometimes, wisdom is reflected in long-term, repeated, complex games. Of course, if viewed from a single-game perspective, some might think our policies have too many constraints, causing us to lose many satisfying opportunities. But in the long run, doesn't this lower many of our diplomatic costs? Reduce many risks? Of course, this issue deserves further discussion. But I think we can actually advance steadily and surely, using a more open, more progressive, more efficient, more scientific method, to defeat a US deluded by superstition and greed. As witnesses and participants of history, what can young people do? Shi Yang. Our dialogue today has also reached the final question. Located in this great transformation unseen in a century, we are both witnesses and participants. Finally, we pick a relatively small entry point. Let's consider it a kind of message. What do you both teachers think is the most important thing young people should do in this era? Yang Sheng. Listening to Teacher Mao just now, I thought of a scene. During the new year, I watched the movie Detective Chinatown 1900. There's a shot like this. After the protagonist recognized the ugly face of the US, he tears up that immigration paper. Then the character played by Chow Yun-fat sticks it back into his hand, saying, "This country still has many things worth us learning. Hold on to it first, learn what you need, and then talk." This statement held true in 1900, and it still holds true today. For young people, I think they should maintain confidence, learn to possess the mindset of a citizen of a great power, and cultivate their own vision for looking at the world. We definitely need to care about China's own affairs, but also, from a Chinese perspective, learn to care about world affairs. Simply put, we need to tell China's story well, and at the same time, use China's voice to talk about world affairs. This is something we are particularly lacking in. When disasters or conflicts happen somewhere in the world, can our microphone reach the scene immediately? If we fight a public opinion war, we need to shape communication power or discourse power that matches our own. We can look at how the West does this. For an earthquake in Nepal, the first website I open is actually the BBC. For conflict in Myanmar, I get more information from CNN, Reuters, etc. than from Chinese media. In this situation, how do we shape discourse power? So, we must maintain curiosity about the world, and at the same time maintain humility. Even if China stands at the very center of the world stage, among any three people walking, one must be my teacher. Carry this mindset to learn from the whole world, not just from Western developed countries, but also from many global South countries. Perhaps China's own culture and colors are too rich and diverse. Understanding ourselves is already not easy, but to stand at the center of the world stage, we must care about the world. My expectations are roughly these. Mao Keji. What teacher Yang said actually makes me quite excited. We are all considered peers and friends younger than us. Actually, the era we are in is a very good one. Our great-grandfather's generation, with their heads tied to their belts, won this red landscape for us. Our father's generation tightened their belts, exploiting their own labor, completed capital and industrial accumulation. When it comes to our generation, we can finally, relatively easily, in a relatively peaceful way, participate in this great rejuvenation journey. I think everyone, as long as they do their own job well, do not think any virtue trivial, and so neglected, is actually making their due contribution to national rise and national rejuvenation. It seems like there aren't many earth-shattering things, but everyone doing microscopic things well, gathered together, becomes an immensely spectacular picture. You do your own job well, love your family, have one or two more children, buy more things, at critical moments, voice more rational opinions beneficial to social welfare in this country. That is actually making a great contribution. If you have spare capacity, you can also do more things.